Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and today I am ranking all of the horror movies that I watched in the month of October, aka ranking my Spooktober watch list. There were 14 movies that I ended up watching from the horror/Halloween genre. I'm kind of burnt out on horror, to be honest with you guys. I watched much more than I usually do. There's still a ton more that I didn't get to that I'm saving for another month, maybe next Halloween. I know John Carpenter's work is someone I want to dive into. I'll probably save that for another time. But today I'm just going to rank all of the 14 Halloween/horror movies that I watched in the month of October. So let's get right into it. So coming in at number 14 for me is Jigsaw, the 8th film in the Saw franchise. This is actually my least favorite Saw movie. Spoilers for the Saw ranking that I put out. It's the most bland, forgettable Saw film that has the least Saw editing and like color grading and just so bland and forgettable. I can hardly remember any of the characters' names. The franchise just became so far-fetched with all the traps later on that I didn't really care for this one that much. Coming in at number 13 for me is HUBIE Halloween. Now, yes, this is not a horror movie technically, but it's still a Halloween movie, so I decided to count it on this list. I have a review for it on the channel. I just wasn't a fan of this movie at all. It was so dumb and stupid. It felt much longer than it did. It felt like 2 hours and 15 minutes. It was only about an hour and 40 minutes, which again is still too long for an Adam Sandler comedy. There's very few Adam Sandler comedies I enjoy, and this was not one of them. The one thing that it did do was get me in the Halloween spirit, so I will give it credit for that. But other than that, I don't see myself watching this movie ever again. Coming in at number 12 for me, this one's going to get some dislikes, is Friday the 13th, the original film from 1980. I put out a video where I reacted to this for the first time ever watching it, and it's safe to say I still stand true to my opinions. This movie is a snooze fest for that first hour, and it's only about an hour and a half. The first hour is with boring characters that are poorly developed. I didn't care about them at all, so when they started to get picked off, I didn't care, and there's really no Jason Voorhees in this movie, which is a massive disappointment from someone who didn't know anything about this movie going into it, except for the fact that Jason Voorhees is like the icon of Friday the 13th, and he ends up not even really being in this movie, which is a massive letdown. I hear that he pops up later in the sequels, and that's where he becomes more iconic, but to me, that's something that just kind of turned me away. Yes, I have to give it credit for being a classic horror movie that really played into the slasher genre. It's one that's definitely iconic, but it's not one of my favorites at all. In the end, there was one jump scare that really got me, but overall, just not a really solid movie in my opinion. Coming in at number 11 for me is A Nightmare on Elm Street, the original film from 1984. This was Johnny Depp's first ever performance in a movie. Freddy Krueger alone is so iconic, so going into this movie I had pretty high expectations. Truthfully, this was a little bit of a letdown as well. Just too cheesy for my taste, especially the final shot of the movie. It was so far-fetched and just kind of removed me from the whole thing. The third act of this movie is definitely the strong point for me, but overall it was just, again, kind of boring, slow-moving. I understand it's a classic. A lot of people love this movie, so I'm probably going to get hate for this, but to me, it just wasn't really my cup of tea. The kills were a little better than Friday the 13th, I will admit. There were some pretty gruesome ones, but Freddy Krueger, again, is just a little too cheesy, and I was like never really scared, as opposed to Michael Myers, who is more ominous to me than some of these cheesy slashers from the 80s. But yeah, A Nightmare on Elm Street's one that I may revisit down the road and have a new appreciation for, but as of now, I wasn't crazy about it. So coming in at number 10 for me is Sleepaway Camp, the 80s slasher film that really has a lot of mystery surrounding it. You're kind of curious as to what's going on at this camp throughout, and the twist in this movie really got me. I'm not going to spoil it here, but that was the scariest moment of this movie. It kind of shook me, the way it's edited, the way the sound plays into it. It was just a crazy ending to a movie, and the last 10 minutes are definitely the best part. Like a lot of these 80s slashers, though, it meandered a little too much for me during the first hour or so. Kind of lost my interest a little bit, but I will say there were actually some funny bits when kids would start yelling at each other and fighting. But overall, Sleepaway Camp's not one that I'm going to want to go back and revisit, but again, it's really solid for what it is, and I have to respect it because I did not see that twist coming at all, and it kind of scared me. Coming in at number 9 for me is The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original film from 1974. Now, I have to give this movie credit for being one of the most iconic horror films of all time. Leatherface as the slasher, if you will, the horror icon, is really solid, and the idea of this movie is terrifying in and of itself, as they marketed it as a true story when it's really, in fact, not a true story, so that plays into the fear, and the opening text on the screen really kind of set the tone and mood for the rest of this movie. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty, again, I didn't didn't really care about these characters, and that's an issue I have with a ton of horror movies, especially in the slasher genre. I just didn't really care when these people would get picked off. It's like, oh, it's sad they died, but also, like, I never really knew anything about them, and I don't even remember their names, so I don't know why I should have a reason to care. I will admit there's one kill that really kind of made me jump, where Leatherface kind of turns a corner and it's dark, and he just chainsaws someone down, so that was scary. And just the mood of this movie was unsettling, especially in the last act at the dinner table. That's one of the most iconic horror scenes of all time, but this movie's not as gory or graphic or bloody as you would think. Many people hear the name Texas Chainsaw Massacre, including myself, before I saw this movie, and I was like, that's probably the goriest movie ever. And it actually plays on the audience's fear by not showing you as much. I think less is more is the saying, as your mind really plays tricks on you, and that's why so many people kind of misremember this movie as being as violent as it is, because they paint pictures of violence in their head. But the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, major props to Tobe Hooper, because he did craft one of the most classic, iconic horror films of all time. Coming in at number 8 for me is Scream 3. Yes, this is my least favorite film of the Scream franchise. I actually watched Scream 2, 3, and 4 for the first time ever this October. There's a ranking of that on the channel with my good friend Andy, but Scream 3 is my least favorite of the bunch. It's a little too long and just really boring, especially in that middle act. I know I've said boring a lot, but that's just the way I feel with some of these horror movies. The opening, I will say, is really clever. I'm not really a fan of what happened because I loved a character and something tragic happened to him. The ending, again, I do enjoy, but a lot of the middle of this movie is just, what's going on here? It's kind of retreading a lot from previous entries in the franchise, and overall, it is my least favorite Scream movie, but it's still a 3 out of 5 movie, and I did have a good time with it. Coming in at number 7 for me is going to be Scream 4, which came out in 2011. This is the newest Scream movie, and because Scream 5 hasn't come out yet, it comes out in a few years. The opening of this movie kind of shook me. I was like, oh, this is a little different from anything we've seen in the franchise before, and as it turns out, this would go on to be the most violent, over-the-top movie when it comes to kills, and I have to give it credit for that. It felt a lot more modern and a product of the time that it came out in, and I really did enjoy that aspect of the movie. Neve Campbell, David Arquette, and Courtney Cox all make their return to the franchise, and they all really do a solid job of their roles. The twists and turns in this movie I did not see coming at all, especially in the last act when it's revealed who the killer is. My jaw was almost on the floor because I just didn't see it coming. It was very clever, and Wes Craven is so aware of that when he directed these movies. Rest in peace, because he was a brilliant horror director, and I just love the way that he took Scream 4 in a new direction, kind of relying on technology, live streaming. There's a lot of just things that we're adapting to the time, so I'm really curious to see where Scream 5 heads in the future, because this is one of my favorite horror franchises, and Scream 4 is a really solid, self-aware horror movie that I enjoyed quite a bit. Coming in at number 6 for me is Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, directed by Tim Burton. I believe this came out in 2007, and it stars Johnny Depp as Sweeney Todd himself. I think this is probably Johnny Depp's best performance aside from Captain Jack Sparrow, and I haven't seen enough Johnny Depp, but he is so good in here. He goes to darker places that you don't see in more of his lighthearted roles. He got nominated for an Oscar, rightfully so, and he can sing really well in my opinion. The soundtrack to this movie is ominous, but it also has those classic musical vibes, so it's one that I don't mind listening to apart from the movie, and I plan to do so in the future. Helena Bonham Carter, Alan Rickman, rest in peace. Great supporting performances in this movie, and the opening music beat alone really set the stage for the rest of this really dark Tim Burton movie. This isn't necessarily a straight up horror movie, but it has very horrific elements, so I'm really glad I got the chance to watch it in spooky season, and I'm sure on rewatch this movie will even improve more for me. I actually did a video with Ewan Reviews over on his channel where we really dive deep into Sweeney Todd, so definitely head over his channel, subscribe if you haven't, show that video and the channel some love. I had a lot of fun talking Sweeney Todd. So before I give you guys my top 5, definitely comment your ranking of the movies that you watched in Spooktober down below. What are your favorite horror movies? All that good stuff, because Halloween is only a few days away, and I'm curious to hear that. But coming in at number 5 for me is Scream 2, the follow-up to the original film. It's definitely the closest to the first Scream when it comes to the cleverness of the script and just the overall scares and comedy blend, because the opening is iconic, just like the first film with Drew Barrymore. There's a very iconic opening at a movie theater. It kind of goes from high school to college in this movie, so it does retread a lot of the first beats from that first movie, but it does it in a new, clever way. Wes Craven, he does such a good job of adapting to the times that movies come out in, and just he knows these characters. I really enjoyed this movie. It's not as good as the first Scream, but it's so solid, and I'm glad that I finally watched it. Coming in at number 4 for me is Trick or Treat. I did a video on this where I said I watched Trick or Treat for the first time. Movie came out in 2007, and I had a blast with this movie. It's not very scary, but it does such a fantastic job of capturing the Halloween season vibe, the Halloween night feel. I'd argue it does it better than Halloween, John Carpenter's film, which is a hot take, I know, but this movie is one that I can see myself watching on a Halloween night for years to come. I really want to pick up the Scream Factory Blu-ray with the gorgeous slipcover. That's going to be hard to get my hands on, I know, but Trick or Treat was such a great movie. I'd call it an anthology as it follows 4 different stories on Halloween night, and they all kind of interconnect in a way. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Certain stories were scarier than others, especially one involving, I won't spoil it, but a group of teenage girls, and that one probably freaked me out the most. This one is just so much fun. I can't wait to revisit it in years to come. So coming in at number 3 for me is John Carpenter's The Thing. I watched this movie for the first time early in October. I did a video for it on the channel, and this movie utilizes practical effects better than any movie I've ever seen. There's a scene in the third act that is absolutely terrifying, involving blood, and a sound effect just jarred me right out of my seat, and then the practical effects took off from there, and it was really gross and disturbing, but very effective at the same time. John Carpenter does such a good job of playing off the fear of isolation, especially in an Arctic environment, and each of these characters is just cold. This movie makes you feel cold, and I love it for that reason. I ordered the Blu-ray right after I watched it. I'm sure that years from now, this will be one of my favorite horror movies. It is right now, but I just want to see it a few more times to really solidify that point. It's insane how good the practical effects are and how they still hold up, but my top 2 movies are movies that I've actually seen before. They're just rewatches, and coming in at number 2 for me is Scream, the 1996 Wes Craven film that is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It is so brilliant the way that it opens with one of the best openings in not only horror movie history, but movie history in general, with Drew Barrymore on the phone. It's a mystery. You're trying to figure out who the killer is, but it's playing on these horror tropes throughout the movie, and it's like a comedy horror blend. The kills are gruesome. It's a mystery till the very end, and Matthew Lillard is hilarious as Stu in this movie. Of course, the final act in the house at the party is brilliant stuff. You're on the edge of your seat the whole time, and Scream is a movie that just flies by from start to finish. One of the best horror movies ever made. If you haven't seen it, check it out for sure. It's easily one of my favorite horror movies. But coming in at number 1 for me is Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, the 1960 masterpiece starring Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates at the Bates Motel. This movie is iconic horror that everyone must see. It has one of the greatest twists in cinematic history. I'm very fortunate that I was not spoiled before I saw this movie, because that probably would have tampered or ruined the experience. I went into it very fresh, didn't know anything about it except for the shower scene, and I walked out being absolutely blown away. I've seen this movie 3 to 4 times. I have a poster over there. I own it on Blu-ray in an Alfred Hitchcock set. I adore it. I could gush about it for hours. I actually did a now playing video for it where I kind of had a movie night vlog with it, so feel free to check that out on the channel now. The score by Bernard Herrmann is chilling absolutely to the bone. It gives me chills every time I hear it. It's going to be hard to top this when it comes to my personal horror ranking for years to come. So yeah, those are all the movies that I watched / rewatched in the month of October, aka Spooktober. Hope you guys enjoyed this ranking. Definitely consider hitting the like button and comment down below your ranking or your favorite movies that I watched this Spooktober, as well as the favorite movies that you watched this Spooktober. I'd love to have a discussion with you guys. I know that Spooktober / spooky season is coming to an end. It's sad, I know, but I'm excited to start gearing up for the holidays and the end of the year. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It would mean the world. I'm getting so close to 1,000 subscribers, which is a goal of mine that would mean so much if I could hit that. So if you're watching for the first time, just definitely consider hitting that subscribe button, and stay tuned for future live streams, collabs, content in general, all that good stuff. I've got a lot of fun things planned with The Mandalorian coming back, so just be on the lookout for that. And until next time, I'll see you guys later.